The Wood Whisperer is sponsored by Woodcraft. Just get started. Well, today we're going to get into a little bit of an adventure into some power carving, some epoxy pouring. That'll be fun. Recently I got an email from someone very local who has a mantle with a design cut in it, and they have epoxy, and they're just, I guess, didn't have the confidence they'd be able to get the pour done properly, so we're looking for someone else to do it. Now, interestingly, I don't think they even knew who we were in terms of like the YouTube channel, but we are in Google, so you could find us, and why not ask the local woodworker if they can help out. I let them know that epoxy is not my forte. It's not something I really do a lot of in terms of pours and decorative things, but I could probably help them out. So the husband brought over the mantle, and I finally got to take a look at it and see what we're in for here, and I'm gonna give it a shot. I don't know how it's gonna go, but I figure documenting this adventure would be a lot of fun, possibly hysterical. Let's go take a look at it. Look at this beast. It's 8 foot in length, about 9.5 inches in width, and it's a chonky boy. I guess this was done with a Dremel. She kind of hogged out the river that she wants in here. Got a little nice spiral in there, but there's definitely a lot of areas here that need a little bit of finessing and improvement to get the depth the way we wanted, to get some of the straight lines and things out of there, which don't look as natural as they could. So I do think this is going to take a little bit of extra work, but something very cool when I talked to them was that, much like my family, they're a bunch of big dorks and they love video games. And this shape in particular is from The Legend of Zelda. I believe in Breath of the Wild, Wrist Peninsula is the shape she was going for here. And man, you pull at my heartstrings when you have a woodworking project that's somehow tied to video games. So I'm all in, mentally. Whether I actually can do this or not, that's a different story. So this is the stuff that they brought me. I am completely unfamiliar with deep pour epoxy brands. I don't think I'm confident enough to just do this on the actual mantle. So what I think I'll do is just make a little sample, take a little 2x4 cut off, put a little river in it, and make up a little bit of epoxy, throw some pigment in there, because there's a couple of things I want to look at here. I need to know what kind of cure time we're looking at, how long it takes to set up with the ratio that the manufacturer recommends, as well as how much of the pigment to put in there and how that impacts the color that we get, just so I know what I'm working with. So a sample is a real good idea. All right, so it's the next day. Let's see how the sample did. Oh man, pretty much all the epoxy ran through. I guess the packing tape was not secured well enough, and that end grain is pretty thirsty, so it just kind of soaked its way down until it leaked out onto my sustainer and all over the tabletop. So that's great, that's a good start. All right, so I'm gonna clean this up and then we're gonna try again. I really just don't feel comfortable doing this on the final piece. Wasting a little bit of epoxy while doing this, but I think it's worth it. I just wanna make sure I'm gonna get the visual effect that I'm after. All right, so I'm just gonna let that cure and we'll deal with it tomorrow. In the meantime, I'm gonna move into something that I actually am a little bit more comfortable with. That would be working on the mantle itself, seeing if we can't get that shape just to be a little bit more refined. All right, so the tools I'm gonna use for this are die grinders. I've actually got two. I got one that's cordless, one I've had for almost 20 years now. They're both outfitted with different bits. That's gonna be really handy. This is just a 1-inch ball nose bit. And then this one is just kind of like an oval shape, makes it a little bit easier to get into tighter areas. I'll use a combination of the two and just do whatever I think looks good. One thing you might notice me doing is kind of establishing the border, and what I'm thinking is when you have a harder line like this, you're gonna get a more distinct transition between the epoxy and the wood. You wanna dive off this cliff a little bit more strongly to create a nice clean line all the way across. So my gut just tells me, whenever I see little divots and things like that, to get rid of them, to make it drop off a little bit more severely. Oh my God. Man, when you're in it, it is so fun. But as soon as I take that mask off, because I kind of choke up on it a little bit, I tighten it up a little bit to make sure I don't get any dust into my lungs. Because my gosh, the dust is crazy. But a couple days of this, your neck starts to hurt, your arms will start to hurt. Thankfully, this was not that much because we're just really doing a little bit of touch up. But check out the dust. It can be pretty rough on the gear, dust all over the electronics. Look at the air filter. That's pretty great. But yeah, this is messy, messy, messy stuff.
Messy, messy, messy.
Anyway, let's take a look at the results. Now, what I like about the method I use here is a lot of times my finishing passes are with the direction of the grain, which gives kind of like a very natural wavy undulation. It's hard to say how much of this is even going to be visible after you have colored epoxy in there, but refining the lines, giving them just a little bit more definition, I think you could probably see a little before and after difference here. Another key thing that I was able to do was increase the depth of these waterfall areas. They were all pretty shallow, and I don't think they would have come out the way they're hoping. So I went a little bit deeper in there, and I was also careful to kind of widen them out at the top. They were originally kind of straight, and it just didn't look like that would be a natural shape to me. So I just kind of roughed in a little bit of an angle there. But I think we're in a much better position now to start thinking about that epoxy. But you know, as a woodworker who doesn't do much epoxy, this was the easy part. It's the epoxy that's going to be tricky for me. All right, it's now the next day, and I'm hoping if I look at that epoxy, it's not going to be running all over the place. Let's take a look. Ooh, oh, it looks dry. Nice. And no leaky. You might be able to see this on camera, hopefully, that a lot of that coloring powder has settled. Right, this stuff does take a long time to cure, so anything that's heavy is going to settle down. And what you end up with is almost like a clear coat on top. This gives you some opportunities if you catch it earlier in the process where you could bring in other colors, you can mix those in, or if you're here before it fully sets, you can, you know, kind of mix it up a little bit if you want that pigmentation to stay up near the top. And I think this is one of the strangest things for people like me who don't typically do pours, we're just used to 5-minute epoxy, 20-minute, 30-minute epoxy, is the fact that this is still gelatinous, right? It is definitely not fully cured. It's not really something I would want to mess with too much right now because obviously you could see it kind of holds a shape and you could really screw things up at this point. But this is kind of still in a gelatinous state. Those will most likely settle down. If they don't settle down, I could just kind of hit them with a little bit of heat and they pretty much disappear. All right, so now I'm just going to mix up a really small amount with the lighter color here. We don't need a whole lot. What I'm going to try to do is layer this on top. So let's see how this goes. Now my hope is we could layer this material on top and then just use a stick or something to swizzle it in there a little bit so it's not simply 2 color layers, but the layers can kind of talk to one another a little bit. I hear you. I hear you. Yep. All right, so now I'm intentionally going to stir it up just a little bit. Now from what I see here, I do think that there was probably a sweet spot that we missed already. And that was probably in the middle of the night, while this stuff would have been just a little bit more loose gelatinous as opposed to as gunky as it is right now. All right, so I'm gonna hit this with a little bit of heat and see what kind of effect that gives us. That's pretty cool looking. All right, now I'm doing one more thing here. This is mostly for myself. I just want to see if I could do some of the stuff that I've seen other people do. People like Jess Crow. I've seen her do some amazing stuff with stuff that looks like ocean waves. Connecting with my inner Bob Ross here.
Now then, let's have some fun.
So all I'm going to do is just kind of drizzle a little bit here in the edge. This is clearly something that if you're actually going to make a habit of doing this, you need a lot of practice. And the people that do it actually make it look really easy. It's a lot harder than it looks. All right, update. Just got off the phone with the customer, and I think we're just going to go with a single color pour on this. I showed her the samples that I made, and we also discussed the fact that the waterfalls create a bit of a pour challenge because you have 2 different planes that are 90 degrees to one another, and being able to pour on both of those planes and get that layered effect to look consistent and good is gonna be pretty tricky. And I'm very honest with them about my personal experience with epoxy. If this were just for me, I'd experiment all day long, and if it gets messed up, so be it. But for a customer, I really would like them to be happy with the final result. So the single color is probably gonna be the way to go. But hey, that wasn't wasted effort. I don't have a ton of experience with this stuff, and that was fun, just to see what would happen and the kind of effects that we can produce with just some simple color variations and timing and things like that. So, all that said, we got to get ready to do a pour. This is what I came up with for damming off these waterfalls. Maybe it's overkill, maybe it's not a great idea. I don't know. I can't wait to hear from everybody about how I could have done this so much easier, 10 other different ways, but sometimes it's fun to just dive in and see what happens. Anyway, so what I'm using as the primary material here, this is actually just some shelf liner. I had just a random cutoff of shelf liner for wire shelving. And this serves as sort of a semi-rigid dam material here, so that as we fill this with epoxy, it won't bow out too much. I have it hot glued around the perimeter that provides the primary seal, and then I just used a little bit of tuck tape around the outside just to seal it as a secondary, oh crap, layer of protection. All right, now the way I'm using this stuff, I imagine I probably could have just used packing tape, but now I'm a little gun shy given how packing tape behaved previously, so I figure this is the stuff most people seem to use, and it does feel like it's stickier and it conforms to shapes a little bit better. So as I'm kind of using my fingernail to get it into the corner, that it might be more effective than packing tape, but what do I know? I honestly think this is kind of one of the blessings and curses of YouTube, is the fact that you could spend ages just researching a thing and seeing 20 different ways to do something and doing nothing yourself while you're, conflicted and hearing different opinions from different people, when sometimes, not every time, but sometimes you're better off just going into the shop and doing something, find out for yourself, formulate your own opinion, and then when you do your research, it's a heck of a lot more meaningful if you've actually tried something yourself.
You sure about that?
And as much as I love that people look at my channel and, watch my videos before going into the shop, there is something to be said about just going into the shop. And I guess that's my way of saying I was too lazy to go do a bunch of research before doing this. Yeehaw. So this seems like a really good time to talk about our sponsor, Woodcraft, because ironically, right now, they're trying to get the message out that you should just get started. Head to their website and you'll find tons of inspiration for all kinds of projects that you can start today. You'll find helpful articles, video instruction, plans, and of course, everything you need to make the project a reality, from wood to tools to finishes. You could take a class at your local store or start off on the right foot with one of their amazing project kits. It's all too easy these days to sit on the couch and just doom scroll or get into a research loop where you never actually get anything done. So there has never been a better time to just get in the shop and just get started. So Woodcraft and the Wood Whisperer are here to help you do just that. Thanks to Woodcraft for sponsoring the show. Now let's see what kind of trouble I can get myself into. Here's the part I've been waiting for. All right, so that was definitely more than I had anticipated doing at this stage, but once I started to pour the waterfalls and I saw that it looked like the epoxy was not going to be leaking out, it just seemed like the right thing to do, to be able to get that first layer, to have epoxy in the river area as well as the waterfalls kind of touching each other and making that continuous transition. Now I'm gonna have to put more on top of that, so we still may have some transition issues there. I don't really know, we're gonna find out. But that's about as much as I'm comfortable doing right now, so I'm gonna let this set up overnight and we'll check on it again tomorrow. Well, I wish I had better news. I came in this morning and look at what I found. So while this is certainly upsetting. This is not something that makes me panic. I don't get super mad about it. Ultimately, this is just another data point. But let's take a look, do a little bit of a post-mortem here, and then come up with a strategy for how we're gonna move forward to try to get this thing done. All right, so first things first here. When I started to cut into this, I quickly realized that this is not Douglas fir. The smell was unmistakable, the working properties unmistakable. I believe this is Western red cedar. Western red cedar is incredibly soft. It's also incredibly absorbent, and I think that's the heart of the problem here. So, interestingly enough, the end grain dams are intact. They seem to work. I've got the fill here on the end, and I mean, we didn't go too deep, but it seemed to be fairly effective there. All of the waterfalls that are on the face, the front face of this thing, those let go. And what do I mean by let go? What actually happened? Well, check this out. I don't want to touch it because it's still wet, but you could see the epoxy basically just seeped right in under the tape. And what I really didn't account for is the fact that when you make this kind of cut, that little strip right there, that's just end grain. And end grain, as we know, is very thirsty. So I'm sure what wound up happening was that just encouraged the epoxy to be pulled in, kind of like a capillary action situation, pulled in behind the tape, behind the glue. And then it just caused the tape to let go. And once that tape let go, game over. Then we have the pores. So all of these leaked, and it may not be totally obvious, but there's kind of epoxy everywhere. So what are we gonna do? Well, obviously I need to clean up the mess. That's gonna suck. But I think I need to just let this dry. It sucks because I really am kind of impatient and I wanna move forward on something like this. I don't like leaving projects kind of hanging in limbo, but I've got no choice. I need to let this cure. I don't think I'm gonna touch this thing at all. I'm gonna leave it right where it is. Any epoxy that's in there can cure. Because what I'm hoping is that epoxy that's there now will act as a sealer. And I think that might have made a huge difference here. And if I had known or like realized ahead of time and done the processing on this stuff, thought about the fact that this is Western red cedar, it might have occurred to me that getting some kind of a penetrating epoxy sealer, even a lacquer, something in there, especially where the end grain is, to seal that grain ahead of time, could have made a world of difference. I mean, I don't know for sure, but that is what my gut tells me. So at this point, we'll just leave it alone, hope that the epoxy that we've already put in there will act as a sealer, and then once it's all cured, we can clean it up and try round two. So the only thing I could think to do is to use a scraper or a putty knife and just get as much as I can off of here. Well, now that I think about it, people pay a lot of money for an epoxy floor. The real question is, how far does this go under the bench? Ooh, boy. That might just have to stay there. This is like a Smurf murder scene. Now, while most of this experience reveals to everyone my general ineptitude, think about this. I did make one smart choice. I put this thing on the cart and took it off of my workbench, because if this happened on my workbench, I would be 1,000 times more upset. All right, so I'm not sure how well this is gonna go, but I've got some vinegar in a spray bottle here, and I usually have pretty good luck cleaning up epoxy with vinegar. The key is usually when it's very thin or it's spread out. See if we can get the whole thing to look like that, we'll be in much better shape. Maybe scraping just a little bit more in here. I do not want this thing to be permanently attached to the floor, so I think I'm going to pull both of these up. Oh boy. That's a fun sound. Wow, that really seeped in there. Holy crap. Well, once I started to peel up the layers, I realized just how much that epoxy was kind of seeping through and connecting to everything. And I really do not want these things glued to the floor. So did what I had to do. Pulled everything up, cleaned up the undersides, and now I'll just let it dry. If it wasn't such a crappy day out, I would say, hey, great day for a bike ride. All right, so it's now day 2. This stuff is hard enough. It's definitely not fully cured, but hard enough that we can start thinking about what are we gonna do now? So when I look at each one of these, I am kind of just thinking, there's a chance we might be able to just use what's here without disturbing too many things, because that epoxy really has seeped into those areas and sealed the grain that it might just work. We just have to figure out how to kind of reattach things and just make them absolutely secure. And I'm also not going to get so ballsy and do the whole river. I will probably tackle these one at a time. If it spills, I get a bucket, I catch the stuff that spilled, and I'm not wasting as much material and certainly not making the mess that I made before. What I'm thinking we might need to do here is sort of reactivate the hot glue that's there, but because we have this wide section of plastic, I might be able to just slice along here, cut this open, and lay 2 new globs of hot glue in there, press it back in, and then we might now have a situation where it can take that. I think. Not trying to be lazy here, but a lot of this is territory I'm just not all that familiar with myself. And I don't really have a better idea other than making sure the grain is sealed. Something I should have done before this. And now I'll just add some fresh tape. All right, I think I have everything shored up. I feel pretty confident about this. I felt pretty confident the first time I did this. So what do I know? But I actually think with all of that epoxy seeping out all over the place, it had to have sealed it up, right? It just makes sense that it did. So let's just do one at a time and see how it goes. All right, here we go. And the real problem here is this isn't just like, oh, looks good, and walk away. The leak the other day happened hours later and everything looked stable. And I had stayed in the shop for a while. My mom was here for a little bit longer after me. She checked in before she left, everything looked good. I thought we were solid, and a few hours later, disaster. I'll let that one sit for a little bit, and I'll maybe try one of these other ones next to it. All right, so I gave it a couple of hours, mixed up just a little bit more so I could make sure everything is full. And then what was left over, I wound up just putting a little bit in the trough, the main river area. So I think I'm confident to leave for the day, but I got to keep eyeballs on this because I still don't trust it. I have a couple of security cameras here at the shop. I use them to keep an eye on things and to keep an eye on the cat. I'm going to point one of these at the mantle, and this way I'm only 10 minutes away. If something happens, I have a 10-minute ride to get here, and I could hopefully avoid a major disaster like the last time. But I don't trust it. I got to have eyeballs on it, and hopefully we're past the worst of it. All right, that should do the trick. All right, today there should be no surprises because I watched this thing on the security camera and it was fine. And let's take a look. It appears that all of them have held up. Good spot. Good spot for you to be in. Oops, it spilled. Now this stuff is still very, very wet. You know, it's still at that gel point right now, but I think it's a good time to pour right on top, and hopefully we won't have any further issues. Fingers crossed. Let's mix some more. All right, that's looking pretty good. You know what? No reason to press my luck here. I still have quite a bit more to go. I mean, it doesn't look like it's that much in thickness, but once you go to this width, it's quite a bit of material, and that applies a lot more pressure on everything that I have holding the epoxy in. So I think with the experience I've had so far, a little bit of caution is probably warranted. So we'll check in on this tomorrow. All right, so it's now Monday. I let this stuff cure over the weekend, and I think we've got success so far. No leakies anywhere. It's looking pretty good. It's not fully cured, of course, but I think it's ready for what might be the final pour. Now, one thing I'm noticing, when I look at the level over here, we've got, I would say, a good ½ inch, maybe a little bit more to go. And as you go down, it's a little bit less. So sitting on the cart like this, we're a little bit out of level. So what I'm gonna do, and I already did a little bit of this, but it wasn't good enough. I've got a little wedge under here, and I'm just gonna jack up this side a little bit to encourage the flow to be nice and even all the way across. All right, let's mix up some more. Oh, and by the way, Mistakes were made last week. I don't really want to talk about it, but I made a mess. All right, so I think we might actually be out of the danger zone on this one. I came in this morning, everything looks pretty good. Got a couple little drippies here and there, but like really, really small, so let me show you. So over on this side, I've got a couple areas where I had a little bit of seepage, and what I ended up doing was taking a little bit of gel CA glue, putting that right in that spot, hitting it with some activator, and that seems to have stemmed the flow. And the reality is there just wasn't much flow to begin with. Overnight, this is about all I had for drippies. So it's already starting to thicken up. It's in kind of that gel state now. And that's good because I'm not totally happy with the way the pigment has settled out. This pattern, a little too haphazard. It doesn't really look purposeful. I don't love it. So I'm gonna grab my swizzle stick and see if I can't create a little bit more of a distinctive pattern that's very intentional. All right, you can see even without heat, it still just kind of settles in. And with heat, we'll get rid of a couple of those little bumps and maybe some air bubbles we just introduced, but I'm digging that a little bit more. All right, that is more my speed. Looking pretty good, looking purposeful, a little swirly. It's good. So now we just wait, probably a few more days. I won't be touching this thing, but I think at this point I probably can safely start to clean up the mess after this debacle. Oh. All right, it's been like 4 or 5 days maybe. I think this stuff is hard enough to move forward. It's looking pretty good, but let's get it over to the bench. And I have a feeling I'm in for a bit of a nightmare in getting all of this stuff off. So I figure the workbench is the best place for this because things are about to get real dirty. And epoxy does way more than Western red cedar. This thing has definitely gotten heavier. All right, I'm gonna say this is gonna be the easy side. This is the one without the waterfalls. Now this is the part I was a little bit concerned about, is how much this plastic is gonna bind to the epoxy, but I think it's coming right off just with a little bit of pressure. Well, that could have been a lot worse. Do want to be careful because that epoxy edge where it meets the plastic is probably pretty darn sharp, and I'd rather not get a cut. No! All right, that was stupid. All right, this one's definitely stuck a little bit better than that first one I did. And what's left there, I can kind of just chisel away pretty easily. Right, I tore this up pretty good with my chisel. This is the area where we had the initial leak. It went under the tape, so now it's just sitting on top of the wood below this layer of tape. To me, this looks like a job for the Rotex. Well, good morning. So it's now Monday morning, Friday afternoon. I just left this thing. I was kind of over it, and it was Mother's Day weekend. So I'm going to look at it with a fresh set of eyes because I think we have a smarter way to address this. I think I'm going to use the drum sander. All right. La 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 lava. Chicken. I know I'm not the only parent who has that song stuck in his or her head for the last few months. Right after the drum sander, you can see we've got a whole lot of lines going on here, so we'll have to sand those out. Even some lines across the grain where, I mean, this is pretty heavy. This thing stalls sometimes and you got to push it through and you just get that slightly deeper line. That should be no problem to sand through. We got some areas where just the lack of flatness is biting us in the butt here, a little bit of epoxy left over there. I can keep sanding this, but I think at this point, you know, it's okay if the edge just has a little bit of unevenness. This is not meant to be, you know, perfectly square. This whole thing kind of had a bit of a rustic vibe to it, which is what you're always going to get with something like Western red cedar. So after I finish my apple, I'm going to start sanding this stuff with 120. Now, I spent quite a bit of time sanding the end here, and I just have a lot of that colored epoxy in the end grain, and we don't have any definition really of the river here. So I could sit there and sand it forever, or I could just use my miter saw. All right, now before I get too far here, just had an email exchange with the client, and they want to know if the wood can be darkened a little bit. Now, you could put a stain over here. It shouldn't really impact the epoxy layer too much as long as it's not a very thick-bodied stain or heavy pigmented stain. We can do that, but the reality is I don't have a lot of coloring agents here at the shop anymore. Most of the time I work with clear coats, oils, lacquers when I feel like spraying, and that's about it. Some water-based finishes, but I don't really have the selection of dyes and stains that I used to have on hand at all times. So what I'm gonna do is see if some of the few things I do have will work for them. I'm gonna make a couple of samples on the back end of this thing that's gonna eventually go on the wall, so if it kind of looks mucked up, who cares? Make a few samples for them and we'll see what they like. This is one of the challenges of working with clients is originally, as far as I knew, we were just doing a clear coat, but then once clients see the thing develop, they tend to want different things or they need to change things because they just didn't have the visibility on what this thing would look like at this stage, right? So once they see it, then they go, oh, I wonder if you could do this. And then you have to be willing to roll with the punches. So we'll see what happens here. Got a little bit of blue tape. I'm gonna section off a couple little swatches here and we'll see what we can do. All right, first things first, whenever you do something like this, it's also good to give them an option that they might not have initially considered. A lot of times they'll say things like, I want it stained, and what they mean is they want it clear coated. So you gotta just kind of assume that they don't have a ton of experience and just show them things because you might actually be able to make your life a whole lot easier and you might clear up the communication a little bit. So in this case, I'm just gonna use the original finish I was going to apply, which is just some General Finishes High Performance. And she had expressed that she wanted a little bit of sheen, a good amount of protection, but something that won't yellow over time. Well, that's water-based finish. This will provide a decent amount of protection, but you can see it will give us a little bit of blotch. So it's gonna give it that rustic look unless we do some kind of blotch control. This is just giving them an additional data point. So when they start to actually look at stain colors, they can see that even this will pretty dramatically change the color of the wood. Right now I have two colors of natural one coat that I think might be in the ballpark, chocolate brown, and the other is walnut. The problem is, I don't think she wants it this dark. When the customer says a little darker, they don't mean this. I'm just gonna stir that up real quick. And I think what I'm gonna do is dilute it, 50% with pure. And in case you didn't know, when you're doing things like this, you don't need the second part to do a color test. All the color is in the part A of these, the first component. You definitely do not need to add the hardener. Okay, so now we'll add a little bit of the pure, and that acts as a dilution. Chocolate brown, coming right up. Ooh, it's a little dark. Yeah, even diluted, looking at what this is coming out as, I think we're probably looking at maybe, if this is a 1-to-1, maybe an 8-to-1, might get us closer to what she was talking about. Yikes, that's dark. All right, this is diluted a little more, maybe like 8-to-1. Now we're talking. That's definitely closer to what she was looking for from her description. And now this is the walnut that has also been pretty heavily diluted. Walnut color. And you know what? I also have this old lacquer stain from last year that I used on my brother's desk. you might recall. That's going to go on pretty nice on this stuff. I think it's in the ballpark. All right, well, good news. The clients came by yesterday afternoon. The entire family stopped by. I showed them the various different samples, and I even came up with a couple of more to show them. And we have a solution that's actually what I would think is the best case scenario, at least for me, doing the work. Let me show you. After showing them all these different color variations, eventually what they decided was that they want something that doesn't really detract from this beautiful blue color. And I think the darker you go with the field here in the wood, it just starts to make it a little bit, I think, a little bit less noticeable. So what they liked the most was just good old Armor Seal, right? And that's easy to apply. There's a lot of protection. That was the other thing. They want this to be able to withstand some drinks being put on top of there. And this is Western Red Cedar. That stuff is soft, right? So you need something a little bit more firm on the surface to provide that protection. Armor Seal I actually think is a great choice here, and that's going to give them the color that they want. So I'm going to do one final sanding, get all my tests off of here, and get this thing ready for some finish. All right, so before I apply the finish, I'm going to use one of these guys. It's just a tack cloth. I normally don't use tack cloths. I usually just wipe things down with a damp, very lightly dampened rag, maybe do a little bit of blow off with compressed air. But the Maker brand sent me some of these, so I'm not going to let them go to waste. And I'm also going to use their application pad to apply the actual finish. But with all this haze and this fine dust on there, you really do want to do something to get that off of there. So tack cloth is a great way to go. And watch how effective this is. The key with the tack cloth is you don't want to push too hard. There's resin and just goopy stuff in this thing that makes it tacky. You don't want to put any of that on the surface. You're just using this to lift off the dust. And as always, I put my finish into a secondary container. This way I don't contaminate my can, the stock material. And again, just going to use one of these little Maker pads. These things are just great for laying down a nice, even, smooth coat of finish. All right, that is coat number one. Usually with these pads, I think they're kind of, they're more expensive than paper towels, so I like to get as much use as I can out of them. I'll just kind of wrap them up in my glove like this, my gross sweaty glove. That makes it kind of airtight. I'll just wrap it up and I can put it on the workbench. Now I'm just going to use this again tomorrow, so I don't have to worry about spontaneous combustion or anything like that. And we'll just let this sit overnight. All right, so we're 2 coats in at this point. The wood is definitely sealed. Like if you put water on it, it's gonna bead up. But I think the client wants a little bit more of a film on the surface. After these 2 coats as well, I really feel like it's a good time to just give the surface a light sanding because it is kind of rough to the touch. I think we could definitely do better in terms of surface feel, and that will prepare us nicely for laying down our first coat that's really gonna start to build on the surface. Now, it might be tempting to go with some kind of power sanding solution, but for me, backside sandpaper is the way to go on this, and a nice light touch is really all it takes. Should also mention, everything I'm doing right now is all about touch. It's all about the feel of the surface. Looks is not important. We're just kind of laying down coats. Looks will become more important as we get closer to our final coat. So if it feels smooth, you're done. All right, so now we'll use the tack cloth to get the dust off of there. It might seem like it's a little overkill when I was using the vacuum and sanding at the same time. But what you have to consider is this is a slow drying finish. A wiping varnish like this, or any polyurethane, oil-based finish, takes a long time to cure. So anything we're doing in our shops, creating dust, is all dust that can potentially fall into the finish and give you those little dust nibs that kind of suck to confront after your final coat. So always a good idea, if possible, to just kind of keep the dust at bay, keep it out of the air, just minimize how much dust you produce, especially if the next thing you're gonna do is apply a coat of finish. All right, so I just spun that guy around because I really need to see what I'm doing here. Now it's super critical that I lay down a nice even finish. This is the most important surface, this top surface. The front is probably the second most important surface. So I'll be able to hit those first, hit my sides, and then I'll flip this guy up and hit the underside while I'm confident that we've already laid down a good quality coat on the most visible surfaces. All right, so as I get ready to apply what would maybe be my final coat, I'm seeing something I really don't like in the surface, and I don't know if you can make it out, but there's definitely a little bit of streakiness. Now, I don't know that it's anything specific with Armor Seal, but it's funny, I do hear this from other woodworkers having that streaking issue specifically with Armor Seal and usually satin. And I think a lot of it comes down to the flatteners, right? So if you don't know how this works, you basically have a clear finish and they add flatteners. Think of it like a powder, and that powder living in the finish will scatter light, and it just gives you a less reflective surface. So the mixture that's here is a pretty good amount of flatteners in there, but when we apply by hand, it's very difficult to have a perfect film thickness. We always apply maybe a differing pressure from one stroke to another, or even just our fingers through the application pad or the paper towel we're using. You can have some areas that have a little bit more finish than another. And the deeper the finish is, technically the more flatteners will be in that finish, in suspension. So the light, when it reflects off of it, after it dries, kind of looks a little bit streaky. There's more flatteners in one section than another. So in the past, the way that I would address this is I would switch to maybe a brush, and a brush would allow me to lay on more finish, either a foam brush or a bristle brush. You would lay a thicker coat down, and that would allow everything to look a little bit more even. Or you could spray. I don't love spraying oil. It's not my favorite because I like things that dry very quickly. But in this case, I've got the spray gear. I think we're just gonna switch to HVLP and clean it out real good when I'm done, but I think it's gonna give us better results. At least I hope. And finally, it's done. That, my friends, is what I call a bumpy ride. It was like thinking back to earlier in this video when I mentioned to you guys that sometimes it's best to just jump in head first and learn trial by fire. I think that is truer now than it ever was before. Ultimately, I might have been able to save myself a little bit of heartache if I watched a few more videos, did a little bit more research. But I still think that no lesson is more powerful than the one that actually is impactful and matters. And usually in the wood shop, there's not a whole lot of trouble I can get myself into that I can't also get myself out of. So I really think the pain points that I had on this, the lessons I learned, the mistakes that I've made are going to be so much more impactful than if this was 100% smooth sailing from top to bottom. Just my opinion. In the end, ultimately, what matters the most is that the customer is getting what they want. They like the way that it looks. We got this finished thing worked out. That Armor Seal was not making me happy, but the sprayed version of it looks tremendous. This finish just looks flawless. And I think the clients are gonna be really happy with the final result. And then ultimately I got to learn something on this one. A lot of times I stay in my safe zone when it comes to woodworking, but this one definitely pushed me out of that a little bit. I don't think I'm going to dive headfirst into the world of epoxy pours in my future projects, but this was a fun little diversion. So anyway, I really hope you guys enjoyed this look. This is certainly a different thing than we've done in the past and a different project than we've done in the past. And I'm glad to have you guys along. So thanks for watching. See you next time. Oreo's in the house. Sup, boy? Dude, that is not a bed.
Excuse me.